proud to have Chloe Melas speak with us tonight on her grandfather's,
Grandfather.
on the book that he wrote. And I'll just read a brief remark by Tom Hanks, which sort of encapsulates it. And it says, in the pursuit of authenticity, of accurate history, and undeniable courage, no words matter more than I was there. Read Luck of the Draw and the life of Frank Murphy and ponder this. How did those boys do such a thing? That's by Tom Hanks. So without further ado, Chloe, I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell us about what you're about to.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. It's exciting to meet all of you. I'm at home right now in New York. Worked a long day today. My kids are home upstairs. I hope they don't interrupt this. I wanted to show a video that I made that I have been using on the book tour that I think really encapsulates, my grandfather and his story. So I was hoping that I could share my screen with you all. Yeah. Let's see, share screen. So I'm a reporter at CNN, but I don't cover politics. I cover entertainment. But I'd like to say I have a nose for news. And my grandfather, who was honestly one of the greatest people on the planet, and I know I sound biased, but I promise you he was really, really just a gem of a human being. He did not talk about his experiences in World War II with his 4 children. He did talk about those experiences with his 7 grandchildren. And I was one of those who got to listen essentially at the dinner table at his knee and listen to him tell these stories. In retirement, in the mid to late 90s, he was writing Luck of the Draw. And this was a passion project of his to pay his respects and honor to his fellow men from the 100th Bomb Group, but to also write down the stories of what he went through for our family. And I would like to think it was a cathartic process and healing process for him. It took him about 10 years to write. He toiled away in the basement writing Luck of the Draw. And when he gave it to the family, for those that did read it, like his 4 adult children at the time, they did not know what their father had been through. They knew bits and pieces that grandpa had been, or their dad had been, a prisoner of war in Stalag Luft III, where the Great Escape happened, while the Great Escape happened. They knew that he had taken part in a death march from Stalag Luft III to Stalag 7A, and I have one of those shoes behind me that he wore on that march. The rest of his things are on loan to the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. That you can also find them at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum outside of Savannah, Georgia in Pooler. I serve on that board of directors. And you can find it at Thorpe Abbott's. They have a fun museum inside their air traffic control tower. So I read the book in my 20s and I got involved with, like I said, the Mighty 8th Museum. And as I was reading the book a few times and listened to Don Miller, who wrote Masters of the Air, speak at an event at the Atlanta History Center, I was motivated to learn more about my grandfather's story and, him flying 21 missions, being shot down on the 21st over Germany, him going back decades later and becoming friends with the family that turned him over to the Germans. He writes about that in the book, and just to learn more about his POW experience. And obviously to have his book was a great reference, and it looked quite different than this. He had self-published the book. I'm almost 37 now, mom of 2. And I went to my family and I went to my mom, who's one of his children. And I went to my grandmother, who's still alive, 93 years young. And I said, I want to publish the book. And they were like, okay, sure. Well, that was quite the process. And so here we are 3 years later, and that glowing quote that you all heard from Tom Hanks, and I've made a lot of beautiful, kind friends in the process, like former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, Don Miller, General Petraeus, and others who gave support for the book. he's going to be a character in Masters of the Air on Apple TV that's produced by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. He's a minor character in it, and I got to go to the set. But it's been a true labor of love to put the book out. And, you all know about World War II, you know about Black Week, you know about probably what it was like to fly in those heavy bombers and daylight bombing raids. So you don't need to hear too much about that. But I think what makes my grandfather's story really unique is that it is him writing about these experiences. It's not a historian. It's just a regular guy who wrote this book, and he happens to be a damn good writer, and it's a damn good story. And so that's why it became a New York Times bestseller. I mean, this is the little engine that could. This is the book that they said was niche. This is the book that they said, okay, we'll take a chance on it. Little did they know that women in their 20s would be reading it on the beach. And I'm not saying it's a romantic novel, and I'm not saying that some parts aren't dense. Trust me, there's a whole appendices section for those of you that like to get technical. I wrote the foreword with my mom, and I think that I've learned, and I get emotional every time I talk about this, but there's something called the Hawkins scale of emotional intelligence. And I only have learned about it recently. And we all tend to operate on these very low levels of, anger or resentment, or name all of the feelings that we all feel, I'm sure often. But I think the reason that this book also did well is because it's one of those rare moments in life where you truly are operating from your heart and your soul, and that, that giving generosity level, which is high. And so I think with this project, we cut up some levels, and it really resonated with people's hearts, not to be cheesy, but that's what I really believe. In the book, my grandfather has telegrams that he wrote back and forth to his parents. It would take a year before he would get the telegrams back that his family sent to him. He writes about how music saved his life. He was in the POW band. He didn't even, he had the opportunity to move in Stalag Luft 3 to a different section to be with people that he had flown with and members of the 100th, and he chose to hang back because he had just joined the band and didn't want to let them down. There's just really, really interesting moments. And then he also talks about growing up in Atlanta and, knowing some of the Confederate soldiers who were down the street from him, and just his patriotism and why he wanted to enlist after Pearl Harbor. And he really wanted to be a pilot, but his eyesight wasn't good enough. So he became a navigator, and he's the perfect person to be a navigator, as luck would have it, because he was so smart, but he was so patient. And he's definitely the temperament of someone you want, who's going to be your human GPS to get you where you need to go and get you back. A lot of harrowing moments, and I wish he was here for me to ask him so many questions. I just did a piece on CNN.com that published over the weekend about post-traumatic stress in our veterans today. I don't know if my grandfather had post-traumatic stress, but I think that based on the things that he wrote in the book, and that he said that he spent the rest of his life walking with ghosts and having survivor's guilt. And 2 of the men on his plane died the day that they were shot down. It's just like the title of the book, Luck of the Draw. And so I hope that you all will order a copy of the book. All the money goes to the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, and also the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. And I'm just so happy with how it's all gone, because it's been quite an experience. But I don't know if you guys have any questions specifically that I can answer about my grandfather and about what he went through. But yes, it's been this wildly amazing and fulfilling experience, and I'm so happy my grandmother has lived to see it all come to fruition. And I wonder what Grandpa would say if he knew that Tom Hanks put a quote on his book. I think he would I think he would be so shocked. I know he would be.
Can you give us any insight into some of the stories?
Yes. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, I think that one of the most interesting parts of the book is the day that he was shot down. And he talks about parachuting out of the airplane for the very first time and hoping that his D-ring, when he pulled it, that the parachute would work. He landed in a German farmer's field and he had sprained his ankle, and he had shrapnel in his shoulder. And the plane was ripped to pieces. He talks about how the German farmers, they had to turn him over to German authorities. And he writes in the book that as he's being taken to be interrogated, that he runs in to a Jeep of some other buddies of his from his airplane that had been shot down. And so they all went together. He talks about that interrogation process. I find it really fascinating how he writes about being a POW and how they each had their individual jobs, you know, whether it was washing clothes or whether it was cooking or whether it was being on the lookout so that others could dig tunnels. My grandfather too helped dig tunnels on the part of the compound that he was in Stalag Luft III, but luckily they were not successful because we all know what happened with the Great Escape. One of the stories that is really sticks out to me is the march from Stalag Luft III to Stalag 7A. This is one of the shoes that he wore on that march. He traded shoes with a fellow soldier. My grandfather had leather soles and they had been marching for many days. And he writes about how his fellow men would be passing out in the snow. It was freezing conditions, and how he couldn't feel anything from his knees down. And they were put into boxcars for several days. And they wouldn't even, the Germans, open the boxcars for sunlight or air. They were going to the bathroom in there. So this signifies resilience to me and the will to carry on. It's like the only thing I haven't given to a museum right now. Everything else is with a museum. I find it so hard to part with this because I lost my house in a fire, and this was one of the things that I was able to take out that night. So I have a very, very strong connection to it.
How did he hook up with the family that turned him in?
Yeah, so later in life, well, so I think that I must get my journalism chops from my grandfather. You know, the kind of relentlessness and the thirst for knowledge and just wanting information. And to think that he did all of that before there was the internet. He somehow, I don't know how, tracked down the people who, there's actually pictures of them in the book. He tracked them down and he went with my grandmother to Germany, and he went and he visited the farmhouse and they still had pieces of the plane there. And he actually met, so it was a really big moment for that town when this happened. It was a Sunday afternoon. Everybody was eating their, you know, Sunday lunch when this firefight was happening and these planes started going down and people started parachuting out. So a young boy at the time who ended up growing up and saw that air battle and saw my grandfather's plane burst into flames and crash, he actually painted it, and it's on the original cover. The publisher wanted a different cover. So I was hesitant to change it because we didn't change anything in the text of the book. We left it all as is. But we lessened the amount of photos and changed the cover. But he became friends with this family, and he ended up being pen pals with them for quite a long time.
Did they ever express any remorse over any of this, or it's just something they had to do? I see your son.
We have a visitor. This is
Yeah.
Luke. This is Frank's great-grandson.
What's his name?
Luke. He wants me to show a picture of my grandmother and grandfather.
Oh, there you go.
No, you know, I would say that my grandfather also had he was an interesting person, right? I don't think he held resentment. I don't think he held grudges. I think that he had survivor's guilt. So hold on. So sorry, this is what happens when your husband goes to a Knicks game and leaves you at home. I hope you all will forgive me and love our little addition here. And actually, so funny, we just brought luck of the draw to his preschool teacher, and my son, and I also have an almost 6-year-old, they talk about Frank Murphy as if he was alive and as if they knew him. So I feel like I'm doing a good job at that. I mean, my grandfather ended up going and having drinks later in life with German fighter pilots, and they had a mutual respect for one another. My grandfather writes in the book about how, you know, this was an officers' camp that he was originally at, and how there really was respect for one another, and even the commandant of the camp, who really kind of fought for some of the opportunities and things that they had. At one point, he writes in the book about how Hitler had wanted everyone in the camp to be killed, and how they negotiated for that not to happen. So I don't think that I think my grandfather understood. My grandfather actually writes in a section that he hopes that the planes that he hopes that the planes that he shot down, that those people went on to live happy lives, that they too survived and had children and grandchildren. And I thought that that was really poignant. I thought that that was very poignant. Sorry. Rich,
I have a question.
did you get the video, Rich?
I'll check my email right
If you
now.
can check and try to click that link, and you'll see the video. It would be great if you could try to share it, because I would really love for you guys to hear from my grandfather in his own words.
All right.
Andrew, I
Got it
think
on
you
my
were
other
trying to
screen.
say something.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for going to this effort to share your grandfather's history with a larger audience. I work with a lot of World War II veterans. I should say almost in the past tense. I actually have World War II veterans who are 100 and 101 who are still able to take phone calls. So what you're doing is bringing this to a larger and younger audience, which is wonderful. You said that your grandfather shared more with the grandchildren than with the children, which is not a unique phenomenon. That actually, I've witnessed veterans sharing with strangers at reunion events that they never shared with their children or grandchildren. So I can't explain why that is. It just is. Did your grandfather ever talk to you about the movie The Great Escape, or television shows like Hogan's Heroes? Can you share any comments?
Yes, I love that you asked me that, and thank you for your kind words. And actually, yes, it's a challenge coin. We have all the goodies in my house. My kids know what challenge coins are. They know all of it. I just love it. I hope they grow up and they carry on the legacy, and I hope that they join boards like me. That would be so neat. I'm thinking about taking them to the 100th Bomb Group reunion in Pooler, Georgia in May, later this month. So we'll see. So I know that he loved the movie The Great Escape, and that he told my mother that it was actually pretty accurate, which is actually kind of neat, minus the motorcycle and things like that. We don't know about Hogan's Heroes. I know he'd seen it, but I don't know what he thought of it. I know he loved Band of Brothers, by the way. So the fact that Tom Hanks and Spielberg are making Masters of the Air and that he has a part in it at all, I think would be mind-blowing for him, as it's been for my grandmother. You know, my grandfather didn't do this for self-promotion. He really did it. And as my grandmother recently said in an interview, he really did this for his fellow men and to tell the family what happened.
I'm not sure. Am I muted? No, I'm not. Thank you for not laughing at my question about Hogan's Heroes. Just FYI, they took a lot of artistic license with regard to one detail of The Great Escape, which is they did not, as far as the history that I've read, commingle different belligerents or armed forces of different countries in a Luftwaffe camp. You would not have an Englishman and an American and I forget if any other groups were represented, but in the Great Escape, they wanted, it was actually that particular Stalag, was it 17?
7. Wait, still, yeah, hold on.
Stalag Luft 3.
3. Yeah.
3.
There
That
you
was British, but they knew that in order to get an American audience, they had to have Americans in it. So they invented the idea that you had Americans and Brits confined by the Luftwaffe during World War II, which was actually true. The Luftwaffe was able to maintain control over those American and other allies who were made prisoners if they were in aviation, which was a much better experience than if you were in any other internment. Do you have an interest, out of curiosity, with other histories of World War II?
I mean, I'm interested in all of it. I just went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans and I happened to speak there, and that was such an honor. And I wish I could have spent more time. I want to learn more. I really know a lot about my grandfather's story specifically, but I've been advocating and fundraising for the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. And I've recently joined the board of the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, right? And I go to their reunions every year, and I've been going, and that's how I'm like friends with John Lucky Luckadoo, who's over 100 years old now, and things like that. I care about all of it. And obviously I'm interested in it because of my grandfather's story. I think that knowing that I'm an entertainment reporter, I can tell you that Hollywood likes to take artistic license and freedoms. I don't really have a problem with it personally, if they want to try to get people to watch. I think that the same thing, I've not seen Masters of the Air, but I am sure for those that know a lot and are detail oriented and know a lot about World War II, I'm sure there will be parts that will bother people, because there's no way to make everybody happy. I've heard like rumors about certain things, and people have screened certain episodes, and they're upset about certain parts of it. I don't know. I think it's hard to please everyone. I think when you start bending those facts, that's not cool. So I think we'll just have to see what has anybody here seen Band of Brothers or The Pacific, and did you all like those?
Only about 7 times each.
I actually met 2 of the Band of Brothers in life. The one who was called Babe Heffernan, and the other one named Goreri. I was at a World War II event about a decade ago, and they were the guests of honor. And the event, which I wish there had been a video made, had the 2 real-life Band of Brothers and the entire cast of the Band of Brothers sitting at the VIP table. And our World War II vets stole the show. They were very entertaining and said some very amusing insights into the HBO miniseries. But it was great, and probably never to be matched again. But we can aspire to even a portion of their dedication and selflessness, and that would be wonderful. But
Chloe,
thank you so much.
Chloe, I got the video link. If you want, I can try and show it right now by
That
sharing
would
my
be
screen.
fabulous, because I think that hopefully it'll move everyone. And if it doesn't work for everyone, then I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to mute myself. And if Rich, if you want to try to share that,
Okay.
let's try one more time, and then you can share the link.
And we will play.
7 weeks after Nazi Germany declares war on the United States, the U.S. Army's 8th Air Force is activated at an armory in Savannah, Georgia. Its mission: transfer to England, create a heavy bomber force, defeat Nazi Germany through high-altitude daylight strategic bombing. The 8th Air Force will become the largest air armada ever committed to battle.
My name is Frank D. Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia on September 9, 1921. I grew up in Atlanta and spent all of my life, well, not quite all of my life. I had 2 years in Cleveland, Ohio in 1929 and 30 during the Depression. It was the only place my father could get a job. So we went to Cleveland for 2 years. We came back to Atlanta in 1931. I was in Atlanta up until the war started in December of 1941. I knew that very likely I was going to get involved because several months before that, they had revised the draft requirements so that anyone from age 21 would be subject to the draft. And we knew that eventually anybody my age who was healthy was going to have to go into the military. Well, I decided that if I was going to go into the military, I wanted to go into the U.S. Army Air Corps, which had just recently been changed to the U.S. Army Air Forces, made it changed in June of 1941. I was a student at Emory University at the time of the attack in Pearl Harbor, and I had gone out to the airport in Atlanta and taken flying lessons, and had soloed in a little Piper Cub, and I flew and I enjoyed flying, so I knew that when my time came, I would want to go into the Army Air Forces. You could see our own airplanes going down, getting shot down, and it was just a frightening sight. Some ME-109 fighter aircraft came in, and one got in behind us and shot us and killed our tail gunner, and then started 2 fires in the airplane, one in the radio room and one in the number 3 engine. I looked around and I saw the co-pilot coming down from the flight deck, and he motioned for me to follow him, and he pulled the release handle on the forward escape hatch. It fell away and he jumped out, and I thought, oh my goodness, we've got to go. So with that, I managed to get my parachute on, and I went back and I followed him out the door. He fell for not terribly long. At 20,000 feet, I was anxious to find out if the parachute was going to work. So I pulled the D-ring, and fortunately it did work. Before I hit the ground, I realized how fast I was falling. When I hit the ground, of course, I sprained my left ankle very, very badly. And while I was there struggling to get out of my parachute, some German farmers came up, and a lady standing there said to me in perfect English, "For you, the war is over," which was something that thousands of American flowers heard during the war.
What was happening, you all, I now understand. So for some reason, when you share the screen, underneath all those photos is really pretty music, and underneath my grandfather speaking is really pretty music. But for some reason, the way that it is transmitting, it sounds like there's no music. But when we send you the video, if you want to watch it again, there's beautiful music underneath all the pictures and underneath my grandfather that's rather dramatic the whole time, and will make you cry. But at least you got to see my grandfather and hear from him in his own words. And I would urge you all to watch it again. It's only a few minutes, but it's some of the only footage that we have of my grandfather. I will tell you, there is an accompanying documentary with Masters of the Air that is coming out around the same time. And myself, my mom, and my grandmother are a part of it. And it's the families behind the series. I guess they did one with Band of Brothers. I haven't seen it. And they found a lot of footage of my grandfather, and he speaks in that as well. But if you guys, I know you probably have other things to talk about tonight, but if you have any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer a few more.
Yeah, one other. Did your dad participate in any reunions or military events after the war himself?
So there's a whole story as to how this book came about, and how his renewed interest in the war came about when he was working for Lockheed Martin. He was their corporate attorney running their offices in Saudi Arabia. And he lived there in Saudi for about 10 years, and he traveled quite a bit all over Europe and all over the world. And so on an airplane flight to London, my grandmother was reading Goodbye Mickey Mouse by Lynn Dayton. And she said, Frank, they're talking about the 100th. And he read the book, finished it on the airplane before they landed. And when they landed, he called the publisher and he got put in touch with Lynn Dayton. And Lynn Dayton told him that they had reunions of people that were meeting. And so my grandfather went to a 100th bomb group reunion. And that's where he saw Rosie Rosenthal. And that's where he met back up with Brady and Egan and the others. And if you don't know those names, you'll know them when the series comes out. And they said, Frank, we thought you were dead. Great to see you. And he never stopped going. And he went to that. He was in the American Legion. He was in the Mighty Eighth Birthplace chapter group in Atlanta or in Savannah. He was involved in a lot of different things. And he played music in bands until the end of his life, saxophone and clarinet. But he was very involved. And my grandmother would go to the reunions. And now I go to the reunions.
I'm just curious too, when he was captivated by and in the Stalag, does he record or relate anything about receiving Red Cross or care packages of any kind? Does he mention that at all?
Yeah,
Oh,
he writes
was-
quite a bit in the book about the Red Cross packages and how they would pool them all together. And so that, in the camp, they pulled everything together, their resources, and then it was rationed out by senior individuals in the camp among the Americans. And it's something that he writes that they had learned from the British, and everybody had their own duty, right, while they were there to keep sane, whether it was building a theater, being a part of a band, a radio station, a newspaper. Even they would have a meteorologist with the forecast that day, right? That they were pretty autonomous in that particular camp, Stalag Luft 3, and it looked like a country club compared to Stalag 7A that was built for 10,000, and they had 100,000 prisoners there. So that's where Grandpa got the lice, the dysentery, the pneumonia, and he lost a ton of weight there after the march to Moosburg. But he writes in the book, he publishes telegrams that he had written to his family asking for spices, socks, chocolate, underwear, and they would be sent. And then it would take over a year sometimes for his mother to get a telegram back to him. But she did eventually get some packages to him.
And the reason I ask is I just saw a documentary where they talked about the British had a secret service that was designed to help POWs, and they would have a specially marked Monopoly game. And apparently the Monopoly board was a little thicker than, and it was manufactured in England, a British Monopoly version, and they would hide escape tools in it, maps and things like that. So, and the Germans were happy to have them occupied so that they would hopefully play games and not be concerned with escaping and doing other things. And I was wondering whether the Americans had anything similar. I haven't heard yet. I didn't know if he has anything like that.
So that's not in his book, but he does write about how they were tunneling out, and he talks about that quite a bit. So that's very interesting. And then he also writes about what it was like waking up the next morning after the Great Escape had taken place, and the daily multiple roll calls each day, and the hell that they went through while they were searching for those men.
Very interesting. Did he have a baseball glove?
No, but it's amazing the things that he did come home with. It's incredible the things he came home with. Keys to one of the airplanes, a breathing apparatus, the Caterpillar Club pin, the dollar with everyone's signatures on it. It's really, really incredible. And he received several medals. I'm trying to get him the Distinguished Flying Cross posthumously. That's a separate project that I've yet to start, and I'm
Look
sure
at
it will
that.
be
Yeah,
hard to do. Yes.
yes, it is. Does anybody else have any questions? You can unmute yourselves if you do.
How did he get so many pictures, Chloe? That's remarkable, all the pictures that were those pictures in the documentary from the book?
So these are not ones that he took. Some of these pictures in the book that you'll see, and the pictures that I just showed in the video of him with his family and things like that, those are from his own personal collection. But a lot of these are courtesy of, you know, the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, fellow soldiers who took them. I was just at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and I was in their library where they have quite a few things from World War II and from this prison camp, and they got out ledgers that were written and things, and they explained to me that there were no journalists in these camps, that these were made from pinhole cameras, and they would bribe the guards to go develop the film in town, and it's a miracle that they got all these photos back home. But if you look, it's all different types of photo credits here. He searched all over the place for these and did a painstaking amount of research. If you look at the footnotes in the book, it's quite remarkable. And I went through my own hell trying to find each photo, because he did not write this book on a computer. It was written on a typewriter. This book had to be digitized, and I had to find every single photo. And there's a funny story about me searching for those for quite a while, and then my grandmother saying, "Have you checked the guest room?" And it was just sitting there in a box labeled "photos for luck of the draw." I'm like, are you kidding me? Could someone have not told me to go in there sooner? And some of the historians that helped my grandfather with his book, we got the gang back together. And that was a really cool process, about 18 months, like re-editing, updating a couple things. It's not perfect, you know, I've heard people point out little things here and there, and it's, you know, I think everybody might read something and be like, you know, but I think it's nearly perfect in my opinion. It's nearly perfect. So
Can I ask a quick question? Was there any difference, did he comment on any difference in treatment towards the perhaps the Jewish captives versus the non-Jewish prisoners of war?
So no, but I will say that I spoke to him in high school and college about the Holocaust, because that was something I was learning a lot about and very interested in. And he told me that they did not know what was going on in the concentration camps, although Stalag Luft III was not that far from Auschwitz. I asked at the Air Force Academy and at the World War II Museum, you know, what did these soldiers know and what did they not know? And I think it's up for debate. Obviously, the government, the US government, knew about the Holocaust and everything that was happening. But it's kind of unclear at different points in the war. I guess as people would become prisoners of war, they got different bits of information as to things that were happening. And when they were marching, and they were marching past some of these concentration camps, right? But no, he didn't get into that. You know, as a almost 37-year-old mom of two now, there's a lot of questions I have, and I would love to sit down with him and ask him 50,000 questions. Unfortunately, all we have is this. But no, that's a really great question. But somebody that could speak to something like that, Rosalie, would be Dan Rosenthal. Kind of similar to your name, Rosie Rosenthal, and he's the famous pilot who flew, you know, all the missions and made it back and evaded capture. And I'm really good friends with his son, Dan. So.
Yeah, because I would think that, you know, the people in charge of these camps, the Germans, had orders, they knew what was going on, and whether they just carried out any kind of problematic things with any Jews that were captured along the way. Not so much that your grandfather or those soldiers, but the Germans in command knew, and whether they would divide and separate one group from another. That's all. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so I don't know that, but I do know that my grandfather, he writes in the book about how the German officers that were running the camp were either injured, older, incredibly disgruntled. They had worse food than the soldiers, and they pretty much were like just trying to keep order and pretty much let the guys do what they wanted. And there was a lot of bribery back and forth, and it was an officers' camp, and so there was some mutual respect there. But when you compare it to Stalag 7A, obviously like a vastly different experience. But you know, he writes about how there was at one point Hitler ordered for all of the American POWs to be killed, and how the commandants and others fought against doing that.
I think a key point also is most of the POW air camps were run by Luftwaffe officers, whereas the concentration camps were run by the SS Totenkopfverband, and they were trained by and indoctrinated by Theodor Eicke, who was he really organized the concentration camp system and instilled in them to be brutal, to have no emotion, and weeded out anybody who didn't fit that,
Right.
kill with impunity. So, you know, those people were a lot harsher than the average person who was running the POW camps, thank God. So,
And what years were your grandfather in the camps?
He was there until 1945.
From which year? You was there?
1943.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
And I did want to also say that when I went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, it was incredibly emotional to see their maps, their interactive maps turn red to watch Hitler's reign, and how he was just taking over so many countries. And it makes you feel so emotional about these men who really were the underdogs, and how we really weren't prepared for the war, but then we became prepared. How if it wasn't for these young men, my grandmother and my grandfather always used to say that we would all be speaking German, right? But the irony is my grandfather, his ancestry actually is German. But anyway, so it wouldn't be a good thing. And so I think that's the whole point of Masters of the Air and the TV show coming out this fall, is hopefully to reach a younger generation of people to be like, wow, how did these young guys do what they did day after day against all odds in the middle of the day on these daylight bombing raids? But I think the Jewish part of it is all very interesting. I do not know how they're going to address the Holocaust, but they are in Masters of the Air.
I have an observation to share with everyone, which is I ran my dad's World War II reunion group from 2010 to the present. We have a reunion scheduled in Washington, D.C. this September. I would love for any of you to attend as my guest, but it's not the most convenient location. It is Washington. But what I've learned from spending my first reunion was in 2007, when they were still running their own events. A lot of the World War II veterans were very modest. They did not talk a lot about what they did, except when they were at these reunions. And then it was primarily with one another or complete strangers, but not their own family. What some of them shared was during the war, they knew very little about the big picture. Maybe if they saw a newspaper or a magazine, but when you were in theater, that wasn't always an option. And a lot of them had said, without any irony, they learned more about World War II by going to our reunions, where we would have guest speakers, you know, scholars and writers like Chloe, who would share a comprehensive history. And they said, wow, no, that I was there. I didn't know any of this. That's one point. And the other point is, and this is to Rosalie, there was a terrible confrontation in a different kind of PW camp. The called them PW camps, not POW camps at that time, from what I read. Where there was the senior U.S. prisoner was instructed by the commandant of this prisoner of war camp to identify all the Jewish prisoners, and he refused. And there were several confrontations at gunpoint where it was this senior PW against a commandant. I believe it was a more pedestrian camp. It was like an infantry prisoners. And this, I think he might have even been a non-commissioned officer, like a sergeant. He said, you know, you can kill me, you can kill all of us, but just know you're going to be a war criminal and there will be consequences, which was pretty bold. It was towards the end of the war. There was a general feeling that the war was going to end not favorably for the Germans. But this is well documented. I can research the story and the history to share with everyone at our next meeting. But this kind of confrontation did happen, and I believe there even was a quite a striking event where he was the commandant instructed all the Jewish prisoners to step forward, and the entire camp stepped forward. And that led to this discourse, this discussion. But yes, it was an omnipresent concern and issue. My dad was a World War II veteran, combat theater Europe, combat engineer, 195 days of combat with the 104th Infantry Division, which is well documented, second largest number of days under fire of any division. But regardless, you raised a valid point, and I wanted to share that information with you.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Well, if I may, your grandfather, I take it, was liberated from Stalag Luft 7A, which, if memory serves, is late April. It's within days of the end of the war. And you also mentioned him being turned in. So when was he shot down? When did he arrive in Stalag Luft 3? Is there any period when he's on the run, or is it almost immediate? And then at the end, when did he get home? What kind of shape was he in? When was he demobilized? And I'm guessing you may know these things because you're a reporter. And when was he demobilized, and was there any talk about his being sent to the Pacific? Was that a consideration?
So I'll answer those for you. Okay, so October 10th, 1943, he was 22 years old, is when they were met by 250 Luftwaffe single and twin engine fighter aircraft. They did drop their bombs over the target. Hit the plane that they were flying that day was not Bastard's Bungalow, which was his typical plane. It was Argo. No one knows the meaning of that plane name. It's the strangest name. And he writes in the book that they don't know what the hell it means, but then there you go. And it's hard to say. As you heard my grandfather say, he parachuted out. He was immediately found by the German farmers in their fields right outside of Munster, immediately turned over that afternoon to the German police. And that is when he was taken to be interrogated. Fun fact, the only plane that returned that day was piloted by Robert Rosie Rosenthal. And I am now friends with his son, Dan. He was taken shortly thereafter, after being interrogated, to Stalag Luft 3 near Saigon, Germany. And he was there 1943, 1944. And then it was one night on January 27th, 1945, when Hitler ordered the guards to evacuate all of the German and British officers to the west due to the Russian army advancing. And so around 11 p.m. is when they made their way to Bavaria, about 20 miles northeast of Munich. And this was the prison camp I spoke about, Stalag 7A, that was built for 10,000 but it housed 100,000 POWs from every allied European nationality. So he was there, as I told you, a really terrible ordeal that lasted 3 days to get to this other prison camp in the boxcars. It was really, really tough. He arrived in Moosburg on February 1st, 1945. He would be there for the next 3 months, and what he described as a living hellhole of all hellholes. So this is February 1st, 1945, Brian, and then on April 29th is when in 1945, General George Patton's American Third Army liberated him, and he'd lost 50 pounds. He weighed 122 pounds the day he was liberated. And General Patton walked up to him in a group of people where he was standing and said, "I'm going to kill these sons of bitches for this." And he writes about that. And that was the story he used to tell when we were growing up. And that was always fun because you never heard Grandpa curse. And so, he writes about how 3 U.S. Sherman tanks crashed through the main gates of the prison camp, how they cried, seeing the white star on the side of the tanks. There's a whole section there which they write about how the American flag, which they called Old Glory, was hoisted to the top of a church steeple in town, and all the POWs stood there crying. And that flag actually is in the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Pooler, and there's signatures all over it. The very next day, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. So if you look at the timing of all of that, right? Like, it's just very interesting timing of my grandfather was in these places at these specific times that make for a very interesting story. He was taken to Camp Lucky Strike in France. It was a rehabilitation center for American POWs. That's where he learned that he had pneumonia, and he was treated with a new miracle drug at the time called penicillin, right? Look at that. And then a few days later, after being treated at Camp Lucky Strike, he boarded a large troop ship called Argentina, and it took 12 days to get to Boston and then back down to Atlanta to his family. And then he went back to Emory University shortly thereafter and finished his education on the GI Bill. He was a middle child. He had an older brother that served in the Army and as a medic, and a younger brother that served in the Navy, but neither of them saw combat, and they both made it back safely. He was immediately decommissioned, and he did not serve any more time, and he had no interest in serving more time, but he loved airplanes. And later, he went to law school at night after he had kids. He worked in insurance for a little bit. And then when he got his law degree, although he never practiced law, he did pass the bar exam in Atlanta, and he went on to be a corporate attorney for Lockheed Martin, which at the time was Lockheed, Georgia. And he served at Lockheed, Georgia for over 20 years and finished out his career in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, for 10 years. I think he worked for Lockheed for 30 years. That's that timeline.
Did he keep a notebook along the way? I mean, no. It's only
No.
when he got home and he recalled all of this?
He didn't recall it for decades. So it was all just sitting there. And if you read the book, you'll see that he writes about how it was just waiting to be written down.
No notes, huh?
No, incredible memory though. And he brought back a lot of keepsakes. My grandfather was just a intelligent, reliable, stable, level-headed human. And he just is exactly the type of person that would write a book later in life. And he was very meticulous with his research, and what he didn't know, he went to the ends of the earth to find out. So it's not just written like a diary. He goes into painstaking detail, which some reviews, people don't like that, right? Because they don't want all the details. They just want to hear the emotional stuff. I like the details because I think there's something in this book for everybody, especially if you care a lot about details in military history.
Right. Interesting.
A question, was his bomber group based in the same base in England throughout his time there? And do you have a map of where that base is in England?
Yeah, so they were in Thorpe Abbots. I can tell you Thorpe Abbots, and I've been there. Thorpe Abbots is in, somebody can jump in if they know exactly where it is. It is, it's not far from it's not far from London. Has anybody been?
Not there.
Okay, so
Not there, but I'm going to speculate it would have been to the southeast of London because
It's
that's
it's
where a
the-
number of the bases were.
so it's at it's northeast of London. And it's 2 hours and 15 minutes north. And I would assume that that is by train. But it's quick. And I took the train there, and it's wonderful, and it's a museum now, and it's really remarkable. They've rebuilt the air traffic control tower. A lot of the Nissen huts and things like that are overgrown, but it's really incredible what they've done. And the town is literally exactly the same from what I've been told. And he writes in great detail about being at Thorpe Abbots and flying out of Thorpe Abbots, but that's where they were stationed the entire time.
Well, Chloe, I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. I am going to go out and buy the book. It sounds fascinating. And I'm glad that the contribution helps other organizations that keep this alive. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you all, and appreciate you guys dealing with the interruptions from my littlest, and also, you know, the issues with the technical stuff with the video. But I will make sure to get Richard a link that he can share with you all in case you want to watch it or share it. And then also, yes, if you can help me spread the word, our work is not done. And if you want me to sign a copy, I know that's kind of weird to do. I don't know why I'm signing books, but I have been next to my name in the forward section. But if you message me on Instagram or ask Richard for my email, you can mail it to me and I'll mail it back and sign it or something. That's the second best option, right? Since he's not here. We don't have
Are you going on a book tour?
I've just pretty much finished it. I've been all over. I've been all over the United States. And my next stop is the 100th Bomb Group reunion on May 26th at the museum in Savannah, right outside of Savannah and Pooler. My mother will be speaking that Friday. I'm going to be stopping over on Saturday. If you guys want to go, you should. It's going to be awesome that weekend, and people from Apple TV will be there. It's going to be a cool experience. I will be speaking at June 3rd at Columbia University with Sandy Alderson, the former president of the New York Mets, who's a friend of mine, and his father was in the 8th Air Force, and we serve on the board for the museum in Savannah together. So we're going to be doing that. And then I'm going to try to do something at West Point. I was at West Point earlier this week, but I'm going to try to do like a bigger discussion there in the fall. And the book is going to be published by a different publisher in the UK in the fall. So I'll be doing some things in London.
And your home base is Georgia?
No, my home base is Westchester, New York.
Oh.
I'm in Pelham Manor, and I am in the city. I work out of Hudson Yards every single day. So if you guys ever want to get a coffee, stay in touch, message me questions. You know, whoop, my son's about to knock everything over behind me. Every day, I would love to stay in touch with all of you. So I appreciate it. And any suggestions as to other places I should speak or go or do, I'm open to it.
High schools, go to high school.
Well, I'm open to, there's a lot of those. So I'm open to any help and connections with ones that you guys would think would be meaningful. They're all meaningful, but you know what I mean. So thank you all for your time today.
One last question. Obviously, your book is in the Library of Congress. Have you sent anything to the archives? Your grandfather's video would be something that they would be very interested in.
I don't know how to do that. So if you want to email me and give me any advice, I can look into that. But I've never had anybody say that to me. So
Actually, the organization that I became president for life of, when the veterans said, we're too old to do these, to run these meetings. So we're dissolving. And then parenthetically, they said, but if somebody else wants to take over, looking at the next generation, we'll be happy to attend as honored VIPs, but we are not going to organize that anymore. So there's somebody on my committee of the sons and daughters of the veterans who is an expert on the archives and researching and knows all the resources that are available. Okay, but you should definitely, I will put them in touch with you or give you their contact information.
great. Richard can put us on an email together, and any ideas like that, I'm open to all of them. And also, if you have a local bookstore near you all and you guys want to tell them to order Luck of the Draw, independent bookstores are really important for the success of the book. And as you know, all the money goes to those two organizations I told you about. Well, let's stay in touch. I'm going to go put my kids to bed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
See you all soon.
And we will be in touch. Bye now.
Thanks,
I'm ending it for all. Good night now.